Welcome to session 3 of Unit 309 Project Management. We're going to start looking at project risks and issues. Now, this is a key area and it's something that we touched on in the stages around documentation, and project managers have to manage risks and issues to ensure successful completion and closures of projects. So let's have a look at the aims. So the aim for this session is to know how to manage project risks and issues. And the objectives are to explain the difference between project risks and issues, explain how to identify and mitigate risks, and explain how to manage issues. So let's get started. But before we look at how we would manage or deal with those risks and issues, we need to make sure or clarify the difference. So a risk is something that has the potential to occur or to go wrong. It may be very unlikely, likely that it'll happen, but if it has even got the smallest possibility of it affecting the project, then it should be considered a risk. And we talked briefly about this and highlighted that you'll have a risk log register, and we'll go back to that. And that will be produced at the planning stage, whereas an issue is defined as an event that has happened and is having an impact or has the potential to impact the project. So risks will need to be identified and usually start at the planning stage and recorded in some sort of risk log or register. The table or register coming up on the screen now shows some examples of some common sort of project risks. Number one there, no clear project schedule, or it is not clearly understood. We talked about a project schedule and why it's important in the documentation is it's a low likelihood there because people say that they're going to make sure there is one. Design does not get export license. Number three, their main supplier unable to meet demand. There could be others such as severe weather impact or regulator, government introduces a new requirement, for example. But whatever the risks we identify, we need to decide on the impact and then decide on how we're going to manage them. Now that could be anything from ignoring them because we just don't think they're going to happen, changing things to avoid them, which would be mitigation, or planning contingency for when they happen. And these sort of things need to be started at the planning stage. Whereas if any of those risks materialize or happen, then they become an issue, which is that they're having an immediate impact. Or they could be things that we've never identified as a risk. We didn't envisage them, they've just happened. Things such as significant member of the team goes on long-term sick or worse, leaves. There is a fire or a serious issue at one of our establishments. An IT system goes down, or a major piece of equipment that we didn't expect to malfunctions. Whatever, both risks and issues therefore have an impact. And risks need to be identified. They may not happen, but they need to be planned for and mitigated against to reduce the likelihood of them happening. Whereas the issues have a direct impact on the project, and we'll need to put actions in place to reduce their impact and get on with trying to keep the project on track. Whether risks or issues, how they are managed or tracked could be the difference between the success or failure of a project. If you look at this example we've got here of this risk register, you can see that things are in red, amber and green to try and highlight that. There are actions and then there is a status at the end about whether it's opened or closed. So this log as a risk log or as a risk and issue log, or they may be separated, is about tracking and keeping on top of the risks and the issues. So it's absolutely key that we identify and mitigate against risks, and it's critical how we go about managing issues. Risk identification starts in the planning stages but is ongoing, and it needs to be involving and consulting with all the key stakeholders and agreeing an approach and responsibilities for that risk management and for the planning and creation of a risk log, and then how and when it will be updated, who maintain it, and the reporting of any potential risks. There needs to be a process or a framework that is agreed, and it can be as simple along these principles. First of all, and absolutely critical, is that we identify the risks. So we need to identify the potential risks to the project or to the outcomes. We then need to analyse each of those risks and their likely impact on the project, and we can use the red, amber, green to prioritise these, because prioritising them and ranking them according to the likelihood they will have and how much damage they will cause is essential. And then from that we can take actions to mitigate based on those priorities, take the most challenging risks and work to get in front of them before they start causing trouble, or where they're deemed not likely to happen or cause too much risk or cost, then we can just plan contingency, and then monitor regularly and keep an eye on the risks that you plan for, and maintain an awareness of any new risks that could come from one solving a previous risk or things that just come up as we go along. The risk register is a live document and it needs to be reviewed at all project meetings, as secondary risks can occur at any times as we encounter issues, etc. So we need to keep on top of it. And then the process for managing issues may be slightly different. Even if it's recorded the same, monitored, or people amalgamate them into the same log, so the issue and risk log is on the same register, because identifying issues that are happening early and then limiting their impact quickly and efficiently is a priority. And to do that, there are some key steps. First is having a register or a log. Ideally some sort of collaborative document that everybody can access, maybe online, in the same way as we showed the table for the risks, but then you can transfer the risks when they happen and become issues and track them, and all can see it as it goes along. And be clear who and when these are going to be logged. Who's going to do what and when, because updating and making sure people know who can add issues to the log and what they're actually responsible for doing is important. Always assign probability, priority or severity to that, and have some sort of system for that. And then assign actions, use action plans and put names next to the actions, assigning resolution to the best person equipped to deal with it, so there is a responsibility defined on the plan. Monitor and update the progress, record any escalation, so that you can look back at it and see how it goes. It should give you some sort of running commentary which clearly identifies any impact. And that should allow us to get to something like this example shown on the screen for tracking it. And from that, we can improve and evaluate resolutions. So when issues are resolved, we can ensure they are checked, that they are resolved, and record the impact for the project's benefit, viability, amendments that have been made. We can adjust time, cost and scope. We can then close it, because when things are resolved, we do not delete it, we just close it and indicate it on the log by, for example, shading it in or having a closed issue log, because we need those records, because we want to ensure that things are factual and visible. So we want to keep what actually happened, not opinions and feelings, and then we want to make it available to all the stakeholders, so there's some sort of transparency, and that we can use it to take forward to the next project. When we get to the review stage, we can use it to show where things, because what happens is by the end of the project everybody forgets about the issues and how we got over them, and they just see the success if it's gone well, or the failure if it's gone badly. So got to the end of this session, and shortly we'll be doing an activity, but first I just wanted to recap that our aim was to know how to manage project risks and issues, and we outlined the differences between a risk and an issue. We've looked at how we identify and mitigate, so that's the management of risks, and we've just examined how we manage issues. So let's take a look at the activity. Right then, so I'm just briefly going to go through what's in the activity, which is a Word document that you can download and complete, remembering that these activities in this unit are part of your assessment of your knowledge in this unit, and your assessor will give you feedback on them. Reminder again that you also need to start looking at the evidence required for Unit 3.1.2, which is where you'll be doing your actual project. If you don't know what that is yet, you haven't got any plans for that, you need to speak to your line manager and your assessor now and start planning that, because it's vital that you start. And if you've already started, you may be able to use some of the examples in the activity, because the activity asks you to do 3 parts. Part 1 is quite straightforward, and it's asking you to explain the difference between both project risks and issues. Part 2 asks you to explain how you would both identify and mitigate against risks in projects. Now, there you might want to use, if you've already started your project, you may want to use examples from your project. And Part 3 asks you to consider your project. So that's why I'm saying, if you haven't even started it or started planning it, then you need to find out now, because you should be explaining how you're going to manage at least 2 issues that you have either encountered or that you imagine you might encounter. So 2 potential issues, so talking about them if they suddenly happen. So if you haven't started, you can possibly use these as some planning for how your project's going to go when you do get started. And you'll have to think about whether they're risks, so they have a potential to happen, or whether they're just things that could happen out of nowhere, out of the blue. Any questions? Talk to your assessor. But as I said, it's key that you start thinking here about looking at the evidence guidance sheet, and it's in the resources, and talking to your assessor, your line manager, about what your project is going to be. So get that done, uploaded, and then you can do the knowledge check and move on to the next unit.